staying with us and welcome back. I'm Pearson Sharp in for Liz Wheeler. All right, our collusion and corruption story, long known as the boogeyman for conservatives, there are actually very good reasons that those on the right are concerned about George Soros and his outright attacks against our nation. One of the latest in his long list of subversive tactics has been to funnel tons of money, tens of millions of dollars, into groups advocating for radical social change. Groups like Black Lives Matter. From the start, Black Lives Matter was designed to destroy traditional American values, and its leaders and founders have admitted to being radical Marxists and socialists. But that kind of hate and violence makes sense because the people funding and promoting Black Lives Matter are some of the most radical extremists alive today. For example, leaked documents from 2015 show Soros Institute claiming the violence in Baltimore over the death of Freddie Gray was a unique opportunity to help activists in the city. That included a $650,000 donation to support the groups involved with Black Lives Matter. As so many people have pointed out over the last few weeks, this movement was never about racial justice, but was about pushing progressive ideologies supported by extremists like George Soros. And this isn't a group that wants to find a peaceful middle ground. Black Lives Matter are as extremist as they come. That includes a mob of Black Lives Matter thugs and terrorists who forced a white truck driver to crash his truck, and then they viciously fell on him and beat him senseless nearly to death. We'll talk more about that later in the show. This is what real fascism looks like. Not only that, but thanks to Soros, murderers, rapists, and convicted criminals are getting back out on the streets in cities across Minnesota. A nonprofit called Minnesota Freedom Fund is working to bail out defendants charged with murder, violent felonies, and even sex crimes. The fund claims that the defendants were actually victims of racial inequality and a justice system that unfairly prosecutes Black people and other people of color. And the fund has plenty of financial backing, with more than $35 million pouring in thanks to celebrity endorsements following the death of George Floyd. So far, the fund has literally bailed out a murderer, a woman who stabbed her best friend to death, and a kidnapping rapist who's been charged with sexual assault in 2 other cases. Even the woman in charge of the Minnesota Freedom Fund, Tanya Hansi, is an ex-convict herself, and of course is a close ally of the radical George Soros. And now, the former meth addict is running a multi-million-dollar organization which is dedicated to freeing illegal aliens and putting violent criminals back into Minnesota's neighborhoods. And the executive director of the fund, Greg Lewin, says he doesn't even pay attention to the crimes when he bails someone out. He says their crime doesn't matter. These are the people George Soros wants roaming your neighborhoods. This is a preview of the nation he wants to create and what we can look forward to if his pick, Joe Biden, gets into office. This is an outright betrayal of your nation, and there's a word for that: treason. America used to have a solution to dealing with traitors, and perhaps it's time we bring that back while we still have a nation left to defend. With me now is Director, Senator, and now Senior Analyst for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism, Kyle Schindler. Kyle, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell me briefly, what is George Soros' goal here in America?
Right. So to begin with, when we talk about especially the Minnesota Freedom Fund, we can agree that the ability to pay a bail which is appropriate and to get competent legal defense, these are part of our justice system. We accept that. Every individual who's arrested has a right to seek bail, and they have a right to defend themselves from criminal charges. But what you're seeing with millions of dollars funneled into these bail funds is in order to get rioters and looters off the hook quicker so they can get back to rioting. And the end goal here is really a larger strategy that seems intended to overwhelm law enforcement.
Okay, so back in January or February, before the coronavirus really got started, Soros made a statement saying that we had just about 10 months until the election, and saying that it was a lifetime to undermine President Trump. Is everything we've witnessed this year been one long orchestrated effort by the Democrats to stop President Trump from winning?
Well, I think you're definitely seeing a concentrated attempt to undermine the president's claims to have established law and order, to have turned around the economy, these sorts of things. This effort on bail reform and bail issues goes way back for Soros. He was very involved in promoting bail reform to let potentially violent criminals go free in, for example, New York City. We've seen the effects of that with skyrocketing crime there. We also have a number of district attorneys who were funded by Soros outlets who have refused to prosecute rioters and looters. And what actually happens when you have a refusal by a prosecutor like that to prosecute one of these rioters is the cash bail payments often go back to the arrested individual. So this acts as almost a form of paying them to riot. So these riots and stuff are overwhelming our law enforcement system, and that I think is designed.
So we talk about the Democratic Party and how extremist they are, but your average Democrat living next door, how do you think they can watch this violence unfolding and be on board with it? How can they justify voting for a system that's defending these domestic terrorists?
Well, I think to begin with, they don't understand, or they're not getting the full story about what's going on in some of these places like Portland, for example. The mainstream media has told them that the riots were the fault of federal law enforcement, and that when federal law enforcement left the area, the riots stopped. In fact, that's not at all true. They have continued to target local and state law enforcement in those riots. We see similar things in other cities as well. So the mainstream media, in a large fashion, covers for the unrest, and they keep Democratic voters from maybe seeing what's being carried out in their name. And I think if they really saw it, they would object to it strongly.
We'll just get straight to the point. Would you say that George Soros is guilty of treason?
We have very tough standards for proving treason in the United States, and for good reason. So I wouldn't go quite that far. What I would say is that what he is engaged in is anti-democratic and is really dangerous to the fabric of our nation and our civil society, because it is pitting us against each other. It is undermining law and order just in order to affect an election. I think that's extremely dangerous.
So Hungary has already banned George Soros, officially labeling him as an enemy of the state. Do you think the United States should do something similar?
I think some of the behavior which Soros and Soros-affiliated individuals have engaged in leading up to this election is certainly worthy of investigation by federal law enforcement. I think there may be reasons to believe that these incidents are being orchestrated at a larger level. So that may be worth investigating. And I think any action we do take should be on the basis of sound investigation.
Okay. Well, more to the point for Americans this November, do you think that the extreme violence we're seeing from the radical left should be a wake-up call for Americans who are on the fence about voting for President Trump?
It's certainly my hope that they will take law and order into account when they consider who to vote for. Obviously, the Center for Security Policy, my employer, doesn't take positions on who people should vote for, but we do look very strongly at national security policies and homeland security policies that are being promoted by the various parties. And I think it's fair to say that the Democratic Party has really endorsed elements of the left that are extreme, that are very anti-police, and that they intend an agenda which will make the country less safe.
All right, Kyle, thank you for that, and thank you for coming on our show tonight. All right, on that note, we turn to our free and equal story.